A single video game cartridge sold for $1.5 million at auction. Not a prototype. Not a signed piece of gaming history. Just a sealed copy of a game that millions of people once owned. And that number is not even close to the ceiling of what collectors are paying right now. Welcome to one of the most overlooked and misunderstood corners of the collectibles market. Most people think rare video games are just nostalgic novelty items, things that old-school gamers keep on a shelf for sentimental value. But what is actually happening in this space is something far more serious, far more financial, and far more surprising than most people realize. In the next 10 minutes, you are going to discover exactly which games command the highest prices, why certain copies are worth exponentially more than others, and the single most counterintuitive factor that determines a collectible's value, one that has nothing to do with how rare the game actually is. Let us start with some context. Video game collecting has existed almost as long as video games themselves. In the early days of the industry, nobody thought about preservation. Games were entertainment products, not artifacts. Publishers printed what they needed, retailers stocked the shelves, and when a game stopped selling, it was either discounted, destroyed, or forgotten. The idea that a plastic cartridge from 1985 might one day be worth more than a car was genuinely unthinkable. But time has a way of reframing everything. As gaming grew from a niche hobby into a dominant global industry, the earliest chapters of that story became cultural history. The consoles and cartridges from the 70s, 80s, and 90s transformed into primary source documents of a cultural revolution. And as with any cultural artifact, scarcity combined with demand created value. The modern collecting boom really accelerated around 2010, but it exploded after 2020. During the pandemic, a combination of factors converged at once. People had more time at home, more disposable income in some cases, and a deep emotional pull toward nostalgia. Auction houses that had never touched video games suddenly started dedicating entire sales to them. Heritage auctions, Wada Games, and others began grading and certifying sealed games the same way coins and trading cards had been graded for decades. That professionalization of the market changed everything. Now let us talk about the actual numbers, because this is where things get genuinely staggering. In July 2021, a sealed copy of Super Mario 64 for the Nintendo 64 sold for $1.56 million through Heritage Auctions. That same month, a sealed copy of The Legend of Zelda for the original Nintendo Entertainment System sold for $870,000. A sealed copy of Donkey Kong for the NES sold for $1.1 million. These were not prototypes. These were not signed by developers. They were sealed retail copies, distinguished primarily by their condition grade and the specific print run they came from. That last detail matters enormously. Print run variation is one of the most critical and least understood factors in game collecting. A game like the original Super Mario Bros. Was produced in enormous quantities over many years. But not all copies are equal. Early production runs often had slightly different label designs, box art printing variations, or packaging details that distinguished them from later pressings. A copy with a specific early run characteristic in perfect sealed condition might be worth 10 or 20 times more than a later pressing of the exact same game in identical condition. But here is what nobody talks about when they discuss these prices. The grading system itself has become one of the most controversial elements in the entire hobby. Companies like Wada Games assign numerical grades to sealed games based on condition, and those grades have an almost disproportionate effect on price. The difference between a 9.4 and a 9.6 on the Wada scale can be the difference between a $10,000 sale and a $100,000 sale. Critics have questioned whether the grading is consistent, whether the market was artificially inflated by coordinated buying among insiders, and whether average collectors can ever trust the values they are seeing reported. That controversy became very public in 2021 when journalists began investigating potential conflicts of interest involving grading companies, auction houses, and major collectors. The scrutiny caused some prices to cool slightly, but the underlying demand for genuinely rare items never disappeared. So which games consistently sit at the very top of the market? Beyond the Super Mario and Zelda titles already mentioned, there are several categories that command extraordinary prices. Nintendo World Championships cartridges from 1990 are among the most sought-after items in existence. These were custom cartridges made specifically for a nationwide Nintendo competition. Only around 90 gray cartridges were produced for competition use, and an additional 26 gold cartridges were given away through Nintendo Power magazine. A gold Nintendo World Championships cartridge in good condition has sold for over $100,000. These are among the most legitimately scarce physical game artifacts in existence. Stadium Events for the NES is another legendary name in collecting circles. This game was originally published by Bandai before Nintendo acquired the rights and rebranded it. Nintendo pulled the existing stock from shelves and replaced it. The result was an extremely limited supply of original Bandai-published copies reaching consumers. A sealed copy of Stadium Events is estimated to have a population of fewer than 10 known examples worldwide. Certified sealed copies have sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars, and some estimates place the theoretical value of a perfect specimen even higher. Beyond cartridge games, the collecting world extends into other formats. Factory-sealed copies of early PC games, particularly from the Apple II and DOS era, command serious prices because almost nobody thought to preserve software in sealed condition. Certain Atari 2600 games with specific manufacturing variants are extraordinarily valuable. And in more recent generations, limited print-run games from smaller publishers on platforms like the PlayStation Vita have skyrocketed in value because the physical production runs were tiny and the games were only distributed in specific regions. Here is a fascinating angle that most people overlook entirely. Some of the most expensive collectibles are not from the most celebrated franchises. Regional exclusives and games that were simply not popular at launch often become the rarest items because retailers returned unsold stock for destruction. A game that sold poorly in stores paradoxically becomes more valuable decades later precisely because so few people bought it. Commercial failure in 1993 can equal extreme scarcity in 2024. What does all of this tell us about the broader collecting market? It reveals something important about how value is constructed in cultural artifacts. A sealed copy of Super Mario Bros. Is not worth $1.4 million because of what is inside it. The game itself is freely available on dozens of modern platforms for a few dollars. The value is entirely in what the physical object represents, a specific moment in manufacturing history, preserved in a specific condition, authenticated within a system that the market has agreed to trust. It is almost identical to why a first edition book can be worth thousands while a reprint of the same text costs $8 at an airport bookstore. This has real implications for anyone thinking about collecting. The practical lesson is that condition and provenance matter more than title recognition. A perfect sealed copy of a moderately well-known game will often beat a poorly preserved copy of a legendary title. Documentation matters. Original receipts, original store stickers, and verifiable purchase history all add layers of authenticity that elevate value. And understanding print variations requires genuine research, not just looking up a game's general reputation. The video game collectibles market is also teaching the broader financial world something interesting. Alternative assets, things like sports cards, sneakers, wine, and now video games, have shown that cultural objects can hold and grow value in ways that traditional financial instruments do not. During periods of inflation and market instability, tangible cultural artifacts have attracted serious investment capital. Whether these prices represent genuine long-term value or a speculative bubble that will eventually correct is a question collectors and investors are actively debating. Before you go, if you learned something valuable today, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to Pixel Pulse for a brand new video every single day. We will see you in the next one.